Good morning and welcome to the Point. This morning we talk about the Flint water crisis with somebody who has been talking about it for months. Not just asking about it, but living it. The Democratic leader in the state Senate, Jim Ananich, represents the city of Flint. Not just that, but he lives there too. And he wants to know more about how this all happened. He says people should be held responsible, but for now at least, he wants the people of Flint to get the attention, the water, and the services that he believes they deserve. We talked with the senator earlier this week at one of the water distribution locations in Flint. Well, Senator, you've been kind enough to come to the studio. You've had us in your office, but we wanted to come to your hometown of Flint for this show because this is very much about one of the bigger national stories that's been playing out over the past few weeks. It's been playing out for over a year here in your city, and that's about Flint water. I should point out, thanks to the folks at Fire Station Number 1 for letting us be here. This scene is being replicated around the city where these people are dropping off or picking up water. You can go through a door, get filters, get testing kits. All of that's going on now. So let's start from today. And I should point out that we're talking before the Senate approved the money for Flint that the House approved last week. But I'm confident enough to say that money, by the time this airs, will have been approved.
Yes.
So, with that said, where are we in Flint? How is this city doing?
There's still a lot of fear, still a lot of anxiety. But if you look at it sort of in phases, I would say the immediate need of making sure that people have good water, whether it's bottled or have a filter on their faucet. I think that immediate need, we've turned the corner, and I think people, in large part, there's still folks moving at home or have distrust and aren't answering the door. But the access now to make sure that people have bottled water and filters, and that their water has the ability to be tested, which is extremely important in order for us to know when the crisis is over. I think we've turned the corner on that, and now we have to sort of meet short, medium, and longer term needs.
When you think about this response, we have been here now for over an hour. There's been a constant line of cars. The very first thing we saw when we got off the exit was a trailer, and I believe it ended up being a trailer from workers at Detroit Metro Airport that brought up a whole trailer full of water, not necessarily just for the city, but for the firefighters, because they don't have any water in there either. So what has the response been like from your perspective?
I'll say all over the country, but I'm sure we've got it from people all over the world. It is. I actually posted this yesterday on social media about it. Shows you the decency and the kindness of people, because we've seen people donate for schools. We've seen people, individuals that don't have much money, churches, unions, corporations, stepped up. And it does make you feel at least some people care, for sure.
What has the response of your constituents been? Because I know you and I were talking about it. I mean, some people are rightfully afraid, and there has been, through nobody's necessarily the fault of any individual, there's been bad information, there's been hysterical information, there has been misinformation.
Yes, no question.
So how are your constituents dealing with it, and how are you trying to allay their fears and point them in the right direction?
Early on, when the water switch happened in March of 2014, so it's just under 2 years. Now, we don't know exactly when the lead started leaching into the water, but about 6 months ago, we created a website, flintwaterinfo.com. The expert out of Virginia Tech, he has flintwaterstudy.org. So there's information out there. We encouraged 211 to start operating months ago, and folks can call there and get their questions answered, because misinformation can be as damning as no information, right? Because people, there's already fear, there's already a lack of trust which I don't know if is really ever going to get built back, which is something that's going to have to be worked on. And people are going to have to be told information forthright, quickly, and accurately for them to ever believe again. But I can tell you, I was just getting my hair cut before I came here. There's just total fear, and the information, I think once they know where to go, it makes them feel better. But especially they're just scared.
Do you have, from your perspective, adequate supplies of water and filters and testing kits now that are coming into the city?
Yeah, I think that's sort of, I think when it comes to the immediate need, I think if you see there, that's pretty common. I think we have the water. It's good that people are donating it. I'm not telling people not to do that.
No,
but
you're using it every day.
Exactly, and the supply is going to only last for so long. And filters are important. Filter replacements are just as important. And then the testing kits. I mean, that's an area where people really, really have to do, because we need to find out, is there areas in the city that are getting better? Are some areas still having problems? We need to do an infrastructure study to find out which lines need to be replaced, if any. And no question, it's the water is extremely helpful. But I believe, from talking to the National Guard and from the captains, they've got a handle on how to make sure everyone gets access to it.
I want to talk a little bit about the government's response or lack thereof early on, but before we get there, tell me about your experience with the National Guard, particularly since they've been on the ground here and they've been going to people's houses, because you were talking about a real model of efficiency.
Yeah, I mean, and it's funny because I think some of the folks in the administration were just maybe, I don't know what they thought about me, but because I speak my mind, and for a long time I was really banging on them that we needed this, and in large part was because volunteers trying to coordinate 100,000 people getting water in schools and all these different communities, we were just unable to do it. And Captain Kalinsky, in particular, I want to make sure I mention him at the Michigan State Police, and then General Vedne. I think they're being on the ground and then coordinating with all these different agencies and departments. It's made a world of difference. I mean, I can speak only anecdotally. On Sunday, before I was going to go watch the game, someone knocked on my door. It was a guards woman, and they said, "Here, do you need a filter? Do you need a testing kit? Do you need water?" And they were just, as I was answering her questions, they were going to the next house. I mean, they did the block in about 2 minutes, and they can cover so much more ground and keep track of records, because someone getting a filter and never getting a replacement, that can be just as bad, right? If they're not replacing those filters. So no, it's extremely helpful, and it's much appreciated.
Or a testing kit that they don't return and don't have it, finally figured out. So about 100,000 people, 33,000 households, somewhere in that neighborhood. Yeah. Most have already been contacted directly.
That's my understanding. Yeah, I mean, I went out last week myself and volunteered. I'm going to do it more. One, because you want to feel like you can do something, right? I mean, you want to be helpful, and that's something that people can do. We've had people come in from all over the country. But yes, I think they've gone through once, or close to going through once, and then shortly they'll start making the rounds again for the second time to make sure that replacements are there, and check to see how the water testing's going and things like that.
Yeah, part of the question that I have, and you may or may not be able to answer this, I'm not trying to put you on the spot, but there was some indication that perhaps the contamination wasn't as bad in some places as it was in others. Is that your understanding?
Yeah, I mean, I should say we know it was worse in certain areas, right? The zip code's 48503 and 48504, and I can't necessarily answer why that's the case, but but the long-term exposure to lead in the water leads us, because we don't know when it started, we don't know when how much access they had to it. So the experts are saying we have to assume it's a sort of a population-wide exposure. So especially for young children, we need to make sure that we get them the cognitive and developmental assessments first, put them in some sort of medical home, and then monitor it over a period of time. Also got to keep an eye on for adults as well, but it has the most damage to young people. So in those zip codes we saw citywide doubling of blood levels, and tripling and more in some of those zip codes. So it's definitely a big problem. And the problem with blood tests is half-life of lead in your blood only lasts about 28 days. So testing now, it's arguably important, but not that important, because if people were exposed in the summer or early in the year or last year, it'll be in their system forever, but it won't come up in a blood test, which is really troubling, because it's hard to find exactly who was. I mean, you can do bone marrow, but you don't want to put a 2-year-old through a bone marrow test to find out if they had exposure. So it's really a complicated issue that we're going to have to be dealing with for a long time.
And just to put a finer point on that, because there slowly became the understanding that this water might be contaminated with something other than just the foul odors and smells, people may have stopped using the water before they really understood the full ramifications. So they may have stopped using it outside of that 28 or 30-day window, and so testing now could be inconclusive or could just be wrong.
Yeah, it's most likely going to give people a false sense of basically do a false positive. It'll say that they're not exposed, but that just means they weren't exposed in the last 28 days. Not to say the testing isn't helpful, but it's not overly helpful, because we're basically missing the entire window of time when people probably were ingesting it, eating it, cooking with it. That you almost, all the experts suggest you just have to take it as a population-wide exposure.
I don't want to dwell on this too long, but you live just across the interstate over here, not too far over there. Yeah. So you haven't just been the state senator that's been dealing with constituents. You've been dealing with your own home, your own family, your own small child. How does this impact you?
100%. I mean, we were in the worst zip code, 48503. I have an older home, so it's guaranteed to have lead pipes. You know, and this is going to sound funny, but I never had the discoloration. So when people were telling me it's fine, even though it smelled funny at times and tasted funny, you know, I never had anything but Detroit water. So I said, well, maybe it's just different. Even though we were raising these concerns, you know, we had meetings with the administration, we had meetings with the city and other folks, and expressed concerns. The experts, or the supposed experts, continued to tell us everything was fine. So I was drinking it for long periods of time, and when I would stop and try bottled water, you know, we heated it up for a while, because that's what you're supposed to do when we had E. coli. You're supposed to heat it up for E. coli, but for TTHM and for lead, it actually makes it worse. So, you know, the reason why, in large part, I'm so passionate about it is that I know that people were told everything was fine, because I was one of those people, and they drank it through no fault of their own, and now, you know, there's consequences potentially for the rest of their lives.
Up next, when will the problem be fixed? How? Is the state doing enough? What about the role of the federal government? And what about Governor Rick Snyder? The leader of the Democrats weighs in on that when we continue To the Point. Welcome back to the Point. The water crisis in Flint is first and foremost a public health emergency. The immediate action to get water, filters, and test kits in the hands of Flint residents, by most accounts, is going along well. The longer-term issue of the water system there may not be answered for a while, and maybe never, to the satisfaction of some. The other issue is, how did this all come to be? Did some person or agency cause this? If so, who? How? Will we ever get to the bottom of the tragedy that has become a call to arms for some politicians, while others, like Senator Ananich, want to make sure it doesn't happen ever again in Flint or anywhere else? We continue our conversation from earlier this week. When you think of where we are today, we are a week or so past the state of the state, where the governor gave a speech and said he was sorry that mistakes were made. He wanted to fix it, and the buck stopped with him. There were a lot of people here around the state, some for political reasons, some because they were just mad as the dickens, some because they were scared, who called for all kinds of things, that the governor should resign, that he should be arrested. There were some that suggested even more harsh punishment that I'm not going to get into.
Sure.
Did the governor do anything to allay the fears of the people of Flint, or you as the senator, the representative from here, with that speech?
You know, I think it's one of those things when you talk about lack of trust with the entire government right now, the people of Flint will have some of their fears allayed when action starts happening. And not to suggest action isn't happening now, but once they start seeing more and a continued and a ramping up of services, I think that's when it'll be more easier for them. You know, I do think, I've talked to my colleagues on both sides of the aisle, both chambers. They don't know the full extent of and they're getting so much misinformation, because there's folks, unfortunately, on both sides. There's folks saying, oh, there's no problem at all, and there's other folks that are saying, you know, the end of the world's coming, we need to move everybody out of Flint. And obviously, in the middle, it's the public health crisis that's real, and that needs sustainable and long-term action. And we know what those things are. That's the thing. I mean, we know services like Early On, Great Start, Head Start, all those kinds of programs that do sort of that one-on-one attention. That's how you can determine if a kid has problems, and if they do, what the next steps are. I mean, this is not a death sentence for these kids. I mean, lead exposure, it's a toxic stress issue. It's serious and it's real, but this doesn't mean that they're going to be destined for terrible things. If we get the right services and the right attention, we can actually have kids come out better in the end, because they'd be getting that one-on-one attention they wouldn't have got. So, you know, I think some of those things, I understand people's anger, especially in our community, about resignation and things of that nature, but my whole focus is going to be on continuing to provide solutions and finding answers so that we can get to the bottom of this, so it never happens here or anywhere else again.
$17 million thereabouts in the money that has been approved by the House and will have been by the Senate by the time we're talking. goes almost directly into water filter and testing. So that's the short term.
Yeah.
There's another $80 million from the federal government, another almost $11 million from the state that will also be coming in on top of that. There was an earlier $5 million declaration from the federal government. So we're up over $100 million of kind of immediate aid. It doesn't come immediately, but it will be here in a relative period of time. And the governor says he wants to make further appropriations in this year's budget and budgets in the future. Given that we know that there is a huge push to get $700 million for Detroit public schools over the next 10 years, given the fact that there was something of a surplus. As I said in the show last week, I always think that's an odd term in government when you say surplus government. It's just money that government hasn't spent yet, primarily.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly.
Are you confident that with all of the other pressures that are always on budgets, that Flint will remain in the forefront?
I'm going to make sure it does. So I'll tell you that. I mean, this is something that I'm very passionate about, and that I'm going to hold the governor and leaders of both sides, both chambers, and both parties, that they're going to fix this problem, because they've all suggested that's something they know that they have to do because of the failings, primarily at the state level. We brought experts together. I've met with department heads and pretty much everybody within state government that's willing to listen to me. I brought experts in to show them what we think is necessary. And I have a few ideas for the appropriation that, by the time the show airs, we'll have hopefully I'll be able to get some of those changes in there, because we know nutrition and services like early on, if we get those kids the assessment they need and the nutrition while kids are still in school, the quicker we get healthy foods into these kids, the quicker we can start taking some of that lead out of their system. The damage, from a brain development has already been done, but we can turn the trajectory around in a positive way. And I think we don't want to wait on that. So I've made a strong push for the governor's team and my colleagues in the Senate, and Chairman Pashoka expressed to me that if I can get the changes made in the Senate, he can help get concurred in the House. So I think we have a moment right now to make sure we do some immediate things that are proven to work, and I'm hopeful we'll get those in. And then obviously February 10th we'll have another appropriation, another supplemental, and the budget. And my team is working. Myself and my team are working every day to make sure we provide what we think is needed. Plus, we're also trying to raise private dollars as well, because this is going to be going on for years.
It is beyond a travesty that something like this would ever happen. And so I don't want this to sound like a trite question, but in some way, and I thought I heard you say this earlier, in some way, does this tragedy bring a focus on Flint that had been missing overall, not just maybe in the state, but maybe in a broader sense?
I think without question. I think what I'm, like you said, I mean, it's a careful question, but what you mean, I think, and what I think we both mean is, we of course we didn't want this to ever happen, but since it did, now we can look at a poverty-stricken community with services that have been stripped down, and if we can get these kids the help that they need, whether it's starting now and continue with them as they need it. I mean, not just unlimited services if they don't need it. If kids are fine, then obviously, that's great. But when we know they've been exposed, we can actually, at the end of the tunnel, kids can come out with a better health outcomes than they potentially would have otherwise. And that's the only way I can look at it, because this is my community, this is where I was raised. And if we don't do a good job of taking care of these kids in the future, I just can't think that way. I have to think there's going to be a positive at the end of this tunnel, and I'm just going to keep working until we get that.
There was a vote in the House last week on that $28 million that I mentioned, and the night before, State of the State night, there was some conversation. It was private conversation, some saying, well, we don't know exactly what the dollar figure will be. We don't know exactly when this will come. Well, it came less than 24 hours later.
Yeah.
And it came with a unanimous 106-0 vote. There was one member who was excused absence. There are 3 vacancies. So that was one of the few times a major appropriation that had not been on the table 24 hours, or at least hadn't been publicly discussed more than 24 hours past. How did that make you feel about the response of your colleagues?
Yeah, I mean, if you look back when we made the switch from Flint to back to Detroit, and that the state appropriated money for that was also unanimous in both chambers. I'm hoping that that's an understanding that this is a problem that never should have happened. Mistakes were made, and that solutions and trust, building back trust, is the best way to show people that the citizens of Flint haven't been abandoned, and that that appropriation, I think, is a step in the right direction.
All right, take me into the neighborhoods. Take me into your office, because we were here earlier and somebody who you know, by the way, rolled down their window and said, "Hey, I'm keeping my eye on you." I mean, this has to be unique for you, because you talked about the fact that you drank the water, your family drank the water, that you were told it was okay just like everybody else. But at the same time, there are people that want to hold you accountable for some of this too.
Yeah.
How are the people responding to you? Because as you point out, understandably, many have lost faith in government at all levels.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously there have been a lot of problems in Flint for a number of years. They look at the state government now from the standpoint that they failed them on a clean water issue. So how do you navigate these waters, if you pardon the pun?
Yeah, without question. You know, I live here. I taught in Flint schools. I went to Flint schools. I mean, I've been here my whole life. I'm so entrenched in Flint that, you know, I mean, it's something that I you know, eat, drink, and sleep, right? So, you know, the vast majority of people, you know, seem appreciative that I'm fighting so hard for them. But any anger people have, and I don't care whether people argue it's misdirected or not, you know, we all have a responsibility to help rebuild trust. I mean, I happen to be I obviously chose to be a Democrat, and part of that philosophy is that we believe that government can be a force for good. In this case, it caused irreparable damage. So, you know, it shook me too. You know, I mean, part of me that you know, I always had a healthy distrust for government, you know, when it comes to overreaching. But I always thought the departments that's job were to keep us safe would do so. You know, the trust has to be rebuilt with me. I verify everything people tell me now, and I can understand why people in my community would do the same.
You've been here for a long time, all your life. You look around here, I notice I'm always interested in looking at buildings, which ones are empty, which ones are full, big factories, smaller areas, some revitalization. You see some areas that still are in great need.
Yeah.
This is something that you can't say with any certainty, but given the fact that at least today, there has been now this constant line of people coming in, dropping off, picking up. People have been paying attention, some with focused intentions, some perhaps with other intentions, but nonetheless, taking a look at Flint. The state is paying attention, the legislature is paying attention. If you had to guess standing here today, if you hope that the remediation of the water system gets done and that the children and adults impacted by this tragedy are given the care that they need, what does this community look like in 10 years?
Yeah, it's a good question, because all those things have to happen in order for us to have a positive outcome. You know, I think one thing, and this is going to sound, you know, unusual, but sort of similar to the question you asked earlier. The one thing, if there is any positives, the community is united in a place that I think we haven't been in a long time. You know, and I mean the citizens for the most part, nonprofits, the universities, the schools, the ISD. You know, we have a singular focus right now. And if we can continue that focus in a real positive way going down the road, understanding that we're going to have some bumps, a lot of bumps in the road, 10 years from now, I think we can have better health outcomes. You know, the Ruth Mott Foundation, not the Charles Stewart Mott Foundation, but they chose right after the election to make the entire dedication of their resources in Flint and in the northern part of Flint. That kind of dedication, I think, can lead towards us. You know, this took 30 years or longer to get us in the mess we're in when it comes to the industry leaving and the population leaving. So we can't look at it overnight. But in 10 years, I think we can be on a road that will lead us to be a place where everyone in Flint can feel like it's a decent place to raise their family, and that's what I'm going to be working towards.
When we come back, a final thought about what happens next in Flint. To the point. More than $100 million has been dedicated by the federal and state governments to help Flint begin to recover from this water crisis. It's likely only to be the beginning. A new committee to oversee the progress has been established by the state. Each of those members will serve a term of 3 years, which gives us all a glimpse of how long this process may take. We'll see you right here next Sunday morning at 10 o'clock for To the Point.